pour vous expliquer son. Dr. Nicole Anderson is a senior scientist and interim executive director at the Rockman Research Institute at Baycrest, and she's also a professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Toronto. She obtained her undergrad degree in psychology from Washington University in St. Louis and her master's and Ph.D. from the University of Toronto. She's also a registered clinical neuropsychologist. She's the director of the Ben and Hilda Katz Interprofessional Research Center in Geriatric and Dementia Care. And she's also Associate Scientific Director of the Kimel Family Centre for Brain Health and Wellness at Baycrest. So please welcome Nicole. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm very honored to be here. I've really been enjoying this, even though I don't speak French or understand spoken French. I can read a lot of it, and I've understood probably 75, 80%, and I've been very impressed, especially with the trainees. Really good job. Okay, so today I'm going to start out by talking about trends in dementia prevalence and incidence. Then I'm going to spend the middle part of the talk talking about dementia risk factors, both non-modifiable and modifiable, as well as some intervention studies that have been conducted to try to address them. And then the last part of this talk is talking about the Kimel Family Centre for Brain Health and Wellness at Baycrest. So we saw a lot of slides yesterday about population aging, and one consequence of population aging is the increase in prevalence of dementia that we're expecting. So we're expecting it to double by about 2038, increasing from there. The good news, though, is that the incidence or the likelihood of any one person developing dementia is actually on the decline in the developed world, including in Canada. Nevertheless, the number of people living with it are going to increase just because of population aging. What are some of the non-modifiable dementia risk factors? The first is age, just a simple fact that the older we get, the more likely we are to develop it. The second is genetics. So here I've listed some of the genetic contributions, but it's far more complicated than this. So for AD, for example, you can get a screen of like 60-some genetic factors that contribute to it. The third is sex. So this is from the Landmark study, and you can see that females in the yellow are far more likely to develop dementia than our males. Part of this is due to the fact that we live longer than males, yay us, but even when that's controlled for, it seems that in the later ages, even among the men who do live longer, women are more likely to develop it. Race is also an important factor that I don't think we take into account of enough here in Canada, to our peril, I think, because we don't know who we need to target to really help out. But in the US, there are good data that show that Black Americans are more likely to develop dementia than Hispanic Americans, who are then more likely than white Americans. So I think hopefully with CCNA and more diversity, we'll get a better handle on this here in Canada. And obviously there are many more races than just those three. And finally, where you live in the world is a big factor. So this is showing the increase in prevalence of dementia from 2019 to 2015. And you can see that it is much higher in the developing countries than it is in the developed countries. Obviously, it's not just the mere fact of where you live, it's about your social economic circumstances in that location. So what about modifiable dementia risk factors? The Lancet report was really influential, demonstrating that at least 40% of dementia cases worldwide can be attributable to 12 modifiable lifestyle risk factors. These include levels of formal education, hearing loss, traumatic brain injury, hypertension, excessive alcohol use, obesity, smoking, depression, social isolation, physical inactivity, air pollution, and diabetes that collectively, again, account for at least 40% of dementia cases. This was important not only for kind of highlighting that a very large percentage of dementia risk is in our control, but also for highlighting that we need to take a multi-domain preventative approach to dementia prevention. And also for highlighting that dementia risk is a life course phenomenon. It's not something that just starts, that we become at risk when we're older adults, but it starts early in life and probably even prenatally. But I think we need more research to link the specific dementia risk factors to specific life periods. And I'll come back to more on that in a little bit. So my former postdoctoral fellow, Annalise Laplume, took advantage of Cognicity's Brain Health Assessment, which is a free online cognitive assessment that people can take to get a report of where they are relative to age-matched norms, and then they get a suggestion of whether they should go see their doctor about their cognition or not. And at the time that she analyzed the data and cleaned it up, well, at the time there was like 96,000 people who had taken it, but after she cleaned it, there was close to 60,000 people whose data she analyzed. And the assessment consists of 4 tests: a long-term associative memory test, so a face name test, where people saw faces and names. And then the test phase, they saw the faces and had to remember the name. It was, yeah, yes, no, like, is this Cheryl? So it wasn't pre-recall, which would be hard to do remotely. There was a working memory task, which was like a concentration game, where there was a matrix of tiles and people had to pick 2 tiles to see if they matched when they turned over. And if they did, those were removed from the board and they kept having to look for pairs. There was an attention switching task, which was like trails B. So they touched 1, then A, then 2, then B on the screen. And then finally, there's an inhibition task, which is like the number Stroop task that we saw yesterday, where people might see something like 1, 1 on the screen and had to answer 2 because there were 2 words on the screen. And what Annalise did is she summed these 4 scores. The Cognicity gives you a total score. But for whatever reason, we made it so that higher scores indicate worse performance. And I cannot for the life of me remember why we did that. And I regret it because it doesn't make any sense. But remember that higher is worse. And what she found with segmented regression was that cognitive performance declined gradually from 18 up to the early 60s, and then more steeply after that. And the gray shading is showing the confidence intervals there. This looks really tight, neat and tidy, and quite beautiful. And it does show the underlying trend, but it doesn't show, oh, I wanted to make one more point before I make that. This pattern of gradual decline till the early 60s followed by steeper decline was true for long-term associative memory, for working memory, and for attention switching. They all showed exactly the same thing. Inhibition did not show that. So unlike loads of research with a Stroop task, inhibition, so control versus you know, like when the word 1 was on the screen and you had to answer 1, so the congruent trials subtracted from the incongruent trials, the Stroop interference effect was flat across the lifespan. And it's probably because that form of task is much simpler than the standard Stroop, where you see colored words presented in a different ink color and have to name the color of the ink. So getting back to this tidiness, it is showing where the central tendency is basically of the distributions, but here are the raw data, obviously much messier. It's on a different scale, mind you, so it's going from -2 to +2 instead of negative like 75 to plus 75-ish. But nevertheless, you can see that there's huge inter-individual variability within each age period. Some older adults are doing very, very poorly, way up at the top, but other older adults are doing as well as 20-year-olds. So what's accounting for that massive inter-individual variability? So in a follow-up study, she took the same data set, but when the test first came out, it was just the test. And then a few years in, they included a demographic and health questionnaire. And that included questions that tapped into 8 of the Livingstone's 12 factors. And so she took people who had data from both the cognitive test, the brain health assessment, as well as these 8 factors. And she looked at the link between risk factors and cognition across the lifespan. And so what this is showing is that the top lines are people with no dementia risk factors. And as you go down, it's 1 risk factor, 2 risk factors, 3 and 4 beneath it. And what she found is that having multiple dementia risk factors had a far larger effect on cognition than did age alone. So for example, if you take these 2 yellow lines, see if I can point accurately from here, this one and that one, somebody in their ages 40 to 50 with no risk factors had the same cognitive performance as somebody aged 20 to 30 with 3 risk factors. So having 3 risk factors at the age of 20 can make you look like a 50-year-old cognitively. And as it went on in age, it didn't have as profound of an effect, but still it could age you up to 20 years by having multiple risk factors. She also found in that paper that the prevalence of risk factors doesn't really map on to the Livingstone model very well. So whereas obviously formal education is an early life event, older adults are more likely to have low levels of education just due to cohort effects. And whereas hypertension and hearing loss and substance abuse were put in the midlife in the Lancet Commission, these increase with age and are higher in older adults than in middle age or younger adults. And then finally, things like depression and diabetes that are late life risk factors were actually, well, diabetes was correct, but depression and smoking were actually more prevalent among younger and middle-aged adults. Now, prevalence within the different ages might matter for later life dementia risk. We don't really know. Or it might be, as the Lancet Commission is presuming, that it's really important not to have hypertension in midlife. It may be less important in late life. But I think we need to do a lot more of putting together when risk factors occur and when they influence later cognitive health to figure this out more fully. And there's probably way more than 40% of dementia risk could be accounted for by lifestyle factors if we took other factors into account that were not in the Lancet model. And these include cognitive engagement, diet, stress, and sleep. And so what I'm going to do next is give you the evidence about these 4 additional factors that were touched upon in this paper, to be fair, but they deemed them, I guess, not to have enough evidence to be included in the model. So for cognitive activity, Frel Roche found that older adults who reported using the computer more, doing a variety of different crafts, and playing a variety of different kinds of games were less likely to develop MCI. Now, this is self-report and observational, so we don't know if it's just the people in better brain health are more likely to use the computer and do crafts and play games. So we need to turn more towards intervention studies. And the second bullet point, the first 2 points are also observational, but the third one is an intervention. So people who make music have better cognitive functioning in later life. Observational, again, could be that smarter people play music more often and have greater brain volume. But music interventions have been shown to improve cognition in people with MCI. Creative writing and storytelling interventions, or storytelling intervention, reduce cognitive decline in AMCI, amnestic MCI. So I guess I'm trying to make the point that there are many, many ways that you can be cognitively active, and there seems to be some promise that they help to improve cognition. And one additional one was done by my colleague Sylvie Belleville and I under CCNA's Team 10, the ENGAGE study, where we ended up with 102 older adults with subjective cognitive decline or early MCI, a little bit less than our targeted sample size due to COVID shutting it down, but nevertheless a pretty good sample size, and they were randomized to either the intervention arm, which was learning music or learning Spanish. And I want to shout out to Aline Moussard, who helped run the study up here too, or to an active control arm for 4 months. And what we found was greater improvements in attentional control, in self-reported health and quality of life, in their assessments of their memory functioning, and their anxiety and depression in the intervention arm compared to the control arm. And furthermore, something interesting, not really related to being cognitively active, but both groups had massive reductions in subjective complaints. So after the intervention or the control group, people were very unlikely to report subjective cognitive decline. So for me, that kind of questions how valid or reliable are the SCD criteria. It might be that just these are people who are socially isolated, cognitively underengaged, and if we get them doing that, they will no longer have complaints. For diet, there was the finger trial, but there was also the New Age trial that randomized 1,200 older adults to adhere to either a Mediterranean diet or a controlled diet for 12 months. And those who were assigned to the Mediterranean diet and adhered to it had improved global cognition and episodic memory. We also had a diet intervention in CCNA, Team 5, that I was on with Laura Middleton and Guillain Berlin, which was the Lifestyle, Exercise, and Diet, or LEAD study. Now, this study was much, much smaller, partly due to difficulties really with our inclusion criteria, which were way too strict, but also because of COVID-19. So we only ended up with 14 older adults and published it as a feasibility study. But these were 14 older adults with vascular risk factors and subjective cognitive decline or early MCI, who were randomized to an exercise and diet intervention or just an exercise alone intervention for 6 months. And what we found is greater improvements in delayed recall. And among the 4 people who were in the exercise and diet group who were pre-diabetic at the start of the intervention, none of them were after 6 months of the diet intervention. So this is really promising that just 6 months of a diet intervention can have cognitive benefits and health benefits as well. A diet intervention on top of an exercise intervention, mind you. LEAD 2.0 is in the works, funded by CIHR, again with Laura and Guillain, also as a feasibility trial, because to do this right, you would need hundreds and hundreds of people and millions of dollars, and we just can't go right to that level. But we're going to recruit 140 older adults with executive subjective cognitive decline, who will be randomized to a 6-month completely virtual COVID-resistant trial across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec, who will be randomized to one of 4 conditions: exercise and diet, exercise and education as a control for the diet's intervention, stretching as a control for the exercise intervention and the diet's intervention, or the full control, education and stretching. And our primary outcome is looking at executive functioning improvements after the intervention and 12 months later, 6 months later, I think. For stress, it's been shown that a stress diagnosis in midlife increases dementia risk in later life by more than 2 times, and perceived stress increases the risk of MCI and dementia. And finally, for sleep, we know that sleep disturbances such as sleep apnea, insomnia, or the very fragmented sleep that I had last night increase the risk of dementia. So coming back to put it all together, again, making the point that probably way more than 40% of dementia cases could probably be eliminated if we address these lifestyle factors. But also it brings to mind that we need to not do like we did historically in this field, where we would run our exercise trial or our diet trial or our cognitive training trial in isolation, but rather we need to tackle multiple dementia risk factors at once. And furthermore, we need to tailor the interventions to what this particular participant's risk factors are. So for example, in the finger trial, it was great. They did cognitive training, diet and exercise, and vascular monitoring in everybody. But what if people didn't have any issues with vascular health? What was the point of doing that vascular monitoring? So I think my feeling is that we need to really tailor it to what each individual's risk factors are. And so this was our intent with CCNA and the can thumbs up. And then have I mentioned COVID yet? So in the meantime, what we all did, and many of the people here, Howard, Natalie, Sylvie, others, worked on Can Thumbs Up. So Can Thumbs Up is a fully virtual web-based intervention branded as Brain Health Pro. It's currently being trialed in 350 people aged 60 to 85 in English or French. Participants are healthy controls, have subjective cognitive decline or mild cognitive impairment, and at least one of these dementia risk factors that you can see here. They start out the trial by getting a risk assessment just through questionnaires in 7 dementia risk domains. So physical activity, vascular health, cognitive stimulation, nutrition, social and psychological health, sleep, and vision and hearing, after which they get a report card about their risk, which is either low, moderate, or high. And then they have to choose 3 domains to prioritize. So this is trying to get at personalizing it to their risk factors, 2 of which they have to pick from either a moderate or high risk, but 1 they can pick just based on interest to keep them engaged in the program. And then they go on a 45-week adventure, viewing 4 10-minute episodes per week. It's kind of like PowerPoint, but a lot more exciting than that. There's quizzes and games and things like that. Again, in English or French. It's narrated by Jean Marchand, the Canadian actor. As I said, it's engaging and interactive. People set goals, check in on their goals, reflect on their behavior, etc. So we'll have the results of this. I think the final data coming in is about November, and so look out for some results early next year. So that brings us to the Kimel Family Centre for Brain Health and Wellness, which is starting in September of 2023, which is the world's first research-driven community center focusing on personalized dementia risk reduction. So this is led by my colleague Howard Turco and our fabulous programming manager, Melanie Santa Rosa. And it's available to anybody age 50 and over who is dementia-free in a fully refurbished large space on the ground floor of our Terraces building, which is our retirement home at Baycrest. It has a gym, a warm water, shallow pool, a room with soft flooring for floor exercises, or a classroom for group activities or computer classes, creative arts studio, an open concept theater for lectures or film viewing. And if anybody has $800K to $1 million, we'd love a teaching kitchen as well. So this is a picture of the yoga studio, of the classroom, of the gym, of the open concept theater, of the creative arts studio, and of the pool. And what will happen is people will come in and get a very deep dementia risk evaluation that takes about 4.5 to 5 hours in total over multiple sessions. So we'll get at their non-modifiable dementia risk factors. We'll get saliva for genetics, all the usual suspects of formal education, occupation, income, multilingualism, personality, proximity to pollution, history of head injuries, family history of dementia, as well as modifiable dementia risk factors. So their sensory motor functioning, their vision, their hearing, olfaction, grip strength, gait, body composition, muscle integrity, their metabolic health, so diabetes, hypertension, things like that, sleep with sleep monitors, their level of physical activity, their adherence to the Brain Health Food Guide created by CCNA, their level of cognitive engagement, stress and mood disorders, and their social engagement or loneliness. And then based on that initial assessment, they're going to get a personalized risk report and program strategy. So this will be a document. This is my mock-up, but we'll get real creative people to do a better job. So your risk of dementia in 20 years, if you do not adopt any further healthy lifestyle risk factors, is, for example, 16.4%. And health conditions contributing to your increased risk of dementia are high blood pressure, diabetes, hearing loss, and sleep apnea. Now, we're not a clinical center, so we will not be treating these conditions in the Kimel Center, but we'll be sure to hook them up with appropriate resources so that they can get them treated. And then after that, they'll get their personalized program strategy, which will indicate which of 5 buckets they are at risk of in terms of lifestyle. So that could be physical activity, brain healthy eating, cognitive engagement, stress, or mild mood issues, or social connections. If the risk is physical activity, a report will go to the kinesiologist. Regardless, a report will go to the kinesiologist just for all members, letting them know about any conditions that would influence what kinds of physical activity they can engage in. And they'll get a one-on-one consultation with the kinesiologist to come up with a plan to get up to that 150 minutes of moderate to strenuous activity a week, plus we'll do balance and strength training. If they're not eating in a brain healthy way, they'll take a mandatory CCNA brain health food guide course. And then any additional courses that they choose to take will adhere to the brain health food guide. So it could be eat with Spanish cuisine according to the brain health food guide, or how can you buy food on a budget, which is really important these days, but still adhere to the brain health food guide. If they're not cognitively engaged enough, they can sign up for any course. We'll have language learning courses, computer classes, discussion groups, music making, theater, etc. If they're stressed or have mild anxiety or depression, they'll sign up for a meditation, relaxation, or a yoga course. And if they're socially isolated, there's not going to be a social course because that would just be often. But instead, social interactions will be baked into all the other programs, and we'll have special social events. And then after every year, they'll repeat that baseline assessment, and they'll get an updated dementia risk report. So hopefully for our fake person here, it's gone down from 16% to 4%, and they've dropped all of their conditions except diabetes that they'll continue to work on. And then hopefully they've addressed some other risk domains too, and they only have a few to focus on. So our core hypothesis is that dementia incidence will be lower than Canadian averages. We don't have a control group, particularly among those who adhere to their personalized program strategy. It's not the most exciting hypothesis. It's not the most theoretically deep hypothesis, but if it works, imagine the impact from a public health perspective. And that's what excites me. In addition, the Kimel Center will be a living lab for other researchers and other studies. So we have hoteling office and testing space. Researchers can access our staff, a well-characterized participant pool, the activity rooms, our research equipment. The database will be open access at some point for people to play with. And the Kimel Center will be the flagship for Canthem's Up, multi-domain interventions as well. Finally, we don't want to stop there. We're scaling up and scaling out. We're building a Kimel Family Centre in Bangkok, Thailand currently. We'll obviously have to adapt it to their culture or have them adapt it. We'll do virtual delivery of some of our programs. And I see a day where we partner with existing community centers where people can sign on online and take, not obviously genetics, but take a lot of the risk and program strategy assessment and then take their report to their local community center to fulfill it. So to conclude, a very large proportion of dementia cases are attributable to how we live our lives, and we need to take a personalized multi-domain approach to dementia prevention. And so with that, I would like to thank first my fabulous colleagues here in the room, as well as my funding agencies. Thank you. So the ethics is due on Monday. So if you have any other ideas of what we should include in the assessment, the window is open.
Thank you for this great presentation. I have a question for the first study that you have shown. When you see all the risk factor at different age, did you do the same analysis but separate people, women and men?
We did. That's a separate. Well, we looked at how men and women differ, and I can't remember if we included the risk factors in that paper, but we looked at the age trends separately in men and women, and I can send you that paper. Basically, there was only sex differences on the face name task in terms of cognitive decline. So, yeah.
Nicole, thank you. Thank you very much. That was a fantastic talk. The Kimel Center sounds amazing. I'm happy to hear that I meet the. You started your talk by talking about diversity in research now. So, what kind of challenges do you see ahead for recruiting people into the services at the Kimel Center, and what strategies have you been thinking about?
Yes. Yeah, very, very, very good point. So my dream is that a third of our members are the usual Baycrest suspects. A third are people from other cultures in Toronto, and a third are low income. That's my target. Our membership fee, we have to charge one. This is an expensive adventure. They're not paying for the research, but they're paying for the programming. Is going to start out at $25 a month. And we're working with donors to get funding for free memberships as well. So we're going to target through social media different communities to try to get a more diverse population.
Thank you, Nicole, for such a nice presentation and also exciting us. This really interesting project that you're building. And obviously, it's very, very impressive. I have one tiny question is regarding the risk for dementia that you're going to provide to your participants. So you're going to compute that. So I was wondering whether you were worried that perhaps that it doesn't really reflect reality, right? So it's based on models, but let's say you have somebody who ends up having a 95% risk, or how will you, because that needs a lot of education to understand what it means to have a risk.
Yeah.
And that you're going to be in the 5%. That's so I was wondering how you're going to deal with that.
Yeah, so we're hoping we'll have a center nurse, and a job ad says a genetic counseling certificate is highly preferred, and if they don't have it, we'll support for him to get it. But the CADE score, that's based on the CADE score, and that was the highest value. So at least it's not 95%. But we will also, we'll give them the option to get their polygenic risk score results if they want them. If they don't want them, they don't have to know. And that's where the genetic counseling will really come into play. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be on the CADE score, not necessarily on the factors that you're going to actually, because the CADE score is quite limited.
Yeah, it is. So that is based on the CADE score, and we'll be informing people of that. That's an algorithm based, it's just an estimate. Yeah.
Nicole, thanks. Thanks so much for talking. Really interesting. I had two small questions for you. One was on one of the specific results that you shared on music making. I was very curious what exactly, and it was positive. I was curious if that meant literally composing music, or was this playing music, going through and singing, any type of music participation?
Any type of music participation. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's good news.
Yeah.
Cool. And then the second question was, you had the lists of modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors, and I was wondering about the multilingualism and how that was listed in non-modifiable. And I was just thinking, I thought, well, people can still learn language at any time
Yes, well, Natalie can tell you that the evidence is based on lifelong multilingualism, bilingualism or more. So yes, learning a language in later life is beneficial, but probably not the same thing for the buck as being a lifelong bilingual.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Nicole.